What is happening, y'all? Cowboy here, and welcome to my ultimate longsword guide. Now, the longsword is probably the most popular weapon in Monster Hunter. It has always been a fan favorite. I mean, who doesn't love giant katana-like swords? But it is a very fun weapon. It offers a high level of skill expression with the various counters that it has in it, and it is a delight to play. And I'm honestly really enjoying the changes they made to this weapon in Wilds. Before the IG got back its aerial bouncing capability, I'd actually considered maining longsword for Wilds, and then IG stole my heart, but that's beyond the point. It is in a very good spot, and on top of that, the most common complaint about longsword was that it used to trip people all the time, but with the addition of the new shockproof deco, nobody has any excuse for being tripped at all, because you can solve it with a single level 1 deco. Either way, we're going to be jumping on in, talking about the basics and the recommended combos of the weapon, taking a look at some longswords, and then jumping into some armor. Spoilers, as always. And the first thing we're going to be doing is pulling up the weapon controls, and I want to hop over to the middle page here and talk about the spirit gauge. Now, this is the basics of the longsword. The idea is you attack, build up the spirit gauge, and then you expend it doing spirit slashes to culminate in a spirit roundhouse, which will then increase your gauge. Now, there's a couple different ways to do this. We don't just have to do right trigger 4 times. Instead, we could hit a foresight slash. And if we manage to counter a monster with that, we can go straight into a spirit round slash. If we're in the special sheath stance and we do an EI spirit slash, that is also going to give us a free point of gauge. And then lastly, if we break a wound, that is going to give us 1 or multiple parts of gauge, depending on how many wounds we hit. So there have been a lot of changes, just mixing up how this works. I think one of the biggest is the spirit slash, especially if you played this weapon back in World and Iceborne. The idea was if you nailed the spirit slash, you got to maintain your gauge, and if you whiffed it, you lost gauge. Now it's the opposite. If you whiff it, nothing happens, and if you nail it, you get gauge, which makes EI spirit slash the sexiest it has ever been. But either way, let's talk about the weapon. And one of the most common mistakes I see from new longsword players is they want to just attack. They want to attack and, go through their full combo, and then when it's built up, they go Spirit Blade 1, 2, 3, and then they do their Spirit Round Slash. And to be honest, you never want to do that to build gauge. Instead, we're going to do our Fade Slash, and that is hitting Y and B, or triangle and circle. But just to show that, boom, boom, now step, Spirit Blade 3, and boom. And what's nice about that is not only does that move build a ton of gauge, but it allows us to go into Spirit Step Slash, straight into Spirit Blade 3, straight into Spirit Round Slash. So we're cutting a whole part off the combo. Another thing that we now have is we can do a manual charge of it. So out of after our first Spirit Blade, we can then hold the button down and Spirit Charge. We can also use that to connect and build up gauge. And you're not going to be doing that all that often, but a really good way to think of it is, let's say that you don't have a lot of gauge and you're trying to finish things off. Let me show an example. Let's say I'm like boom, 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 and I'm like, I'm not going to make it. I'm just going to hold the button, boom. And even though I didn't have enough to finish the combo fully, I was able to hold it, and it basically instead of needing gauge, it just allowed me to spend some time doing a spirit charge to then go into the spirit round slash. So it is very useful to have access to that in a pinch. Now, real fast, I'm just going to go ahead and spend all of my gauge so we can start doing some other stuff again. That's the spirit release slash. That's our big damage now. But let's talk about the counterplay, because this is another core way to both build our gauge, and it's kind of the whole flavor of the weapon. So first and foremost, I want to talk about our ability to do the foresight slash. Now, the foresight slash is very potent, and if you nail it, you're going to get gauge. If you whiff it, however, you will lose gauge. So you can see I did it right there. My gauge completely emptied out. And there are 2 parts to this. The first is the dodge. The second is the hit. The dodge needs to dodge an attack, and that follow-up attack needs to connect with the monster. If both of those conditions aren't fulfilled, you can't go into the Spirit Round Slash. Also, this has to be part of a combo, so whether you're going to thrust first, or you're going to do a slash, or maybe you're in the middle of a Spirit Blade, you have to do something before you do it. And the timing on this is actually pretty forgiving, so it's one of those things where you're sitting there attacking the monster, boop, and then you're going to nail it. Either way, very good move, and one that I am I'm getting better at it. I will say, I think properly nailing my foresight slashes is one of the areas that I struggle most with longsword. I am a big enjoyer of the EI spirit slash, however, which is what we're going to talk about now. Now, the EI Spirit Slash we get from doing the Special Sheath. Similar to the Foresight, we need to do an attack first, and we're going to go into the Special Sheath stance, which we can hold for quite a while. Now, there are a couple things we can do from that. The first, of course, being from here, we can press Y for an EI Slash. And that is going to give us a buff that is going to gradually fill up our gauge, which is why my gauge isn't going down now. It's important to note this doesn't happen in red. Once you get to red, your gauge is going to slowly deplete. You can't use this, just keep it sitting in red forever. But still, it is useful just to get that gauge full if you're looking for an opportunity to counter or get a combo, whatever the case is. The second is going to be the EI Spirit Slash, and we really want to attack into the attack. But you'll see how I had that 315 there, that secondary hit, that's what it was. And we can also use this to go directly into our combo, which is what you saw at the start of this video. And that's one of my favorite things to do with the longsword, is execute the EI Spirit Slash straight into the Helmbreaker, straight into the Spirit Release Slash. Ooh, it's very satisfying. But those are going to be the basics of the weapon. One other thing I want to call out, Fade Slash. We have a lot of mobility on this. You can see I can use this to really kind of like circle my way around the monster. So definitely don't sleep on that. Fade Slash is your friend. Make sure you're using it. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is utilizing red gauge and the best way to do so now, because I see a lot of people that are still stuck in the mindset of World and Iceborne, where the idea is we get red gauge, and then once we're in red gauge, we go into Helmbreaker, and then we get back into red, and we go into Helmbreaker. And you might be thinking, oh, I'm going to Helmbreaker, Spirit Release, Helmbreaker, Spirit Release, but that's really not what you want to do anymore. And just to give an example here, let me actually turn off wounds temporarily and put this out of smash. And I want to just showcase the damage some combos are doing. So first, I'm just going to do a YYY combo. So that's hitting 527. And that's just hitting Y 3 times. The Helmbreaker by itself hit 742. And then I need to... Oh, not off me. Let me get my red back up. It usually actually hits a little bit harder than that, so let me do one more. Let's see if we can compare to the 742 with it. There we go, 607. That's more appropriate. And I even look at just our Spirit Blade combo, doing a full Spirit Blade combo. We got the Spinning Crimson. That's up at 696. And while we do have that good damage coming out of Helmbreaker still, the point is we don't need to rely on just Helmbreaker to get damage. Now, going back to the Y spam, one thing I want to talk about is if you just watch this, there is a little bit of a delay here. You can see that, how in between the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, there's a delay. So we want to work an attack in during that. So the point I'm making here is we can still pump out a lot of damage while we are maintaining that red gauge instead of just build, spend, build, spend, build, spend, which is how this weapon has been played for a lot of the time up until now, in my opinion. Another thing which I'd like to talk about is we have a couple of different things which are going to change. Transitioning into red and doing a red combo, we do the Spinning Crimson Slash. And I want to point that out because anytime you're about to get red, a second right trigger press is going to do that Spinning Crimson, which is just extra damage. On top of that, your Foresight Slash becomes the Foresight Whirl Slash when you're in red gauge. And you can actually use this to get a little bit of red gauge back. It's not a ton, but it is still something, so... Whiffed it there. That thing actually hit me. Come on, let's see if I can pull it off. So you can see it spent a little, and then it jumped back up. And so the way I have been playing this weapon now with the changes that we've gotten is typically I will get into red. I will pump out YYYB combos. I'll work in the Whirling Foresight Slash anytime I have an opportunity. And then before the gauge is fully expended, usually right around a little bit past halfway, so a little bit less than what I have now, that is where I will go into my Helmbreaker and the Spirit Release Slash. Now, on the note of Spirit Release Slash, I've seen a lot of people asking, well, you know, do I always want to do the Spirit Release? Do I, you know, maybe I'll just do a single Helmbreaker? Honestly, Spirit Release is massive, massive damage. It is absolutely worth the gauge that's being spent on it. But one thing that I think is really useful to do is wait until the target has wounds. Because if the target has wounds, you'll be able to instantly get back up your gauge. So what I'm talking about is, let's say I'm just, you know, target's here, I'm hitting, I'm gonna go up, nail it, Right out of that, I will attack, hit the wound, gauge, and then I'm going straight into the Spirit Blade 3 Spirit Round Slash. And so anytime there's a wound on the target, I'm absolutely going to do the Spirit Release, because as you saw there, I got 1 gauge from popping that wound, and then I immediately followed it up with a Spirit Blade 3 Round Slash Spinning Crimson, putting me back into red almost immediately. Now, we actually saw this in the... this was actually listed in the tutorial, but one thing I want to touch on here and show this off in particular is going to be a multi-wound break, because this is pretty important, and I see a lot of people not doing this. But when you target the wound, you want to push the left stick in the direction of more wounds. So there's 2 wounds here. If I hit and I hold to the right, you can see I popped both wounds, went straight up to red. And that is incredibly useful as you're playing the longsword and getting those wounds and just getting yourself up into red even faster. One of the last things I want to touch on is out of this attack now, we can now sheath our weapon while we're up in the air. If it looks like we're going to whiff, we can also roll while we're up in the air. Like, oh, it's not going to work out. I'm just going to roll. That will also auto sheath you. And even though the game says, like, while you're up in the air, you can press Y, you don't need to press Y. You just come down. You're going to do that attack. But the bigger thing is keep in mind that we can now sheath the weapon. If, you know, we ramp up in the air and we're about to come down with the Helmbreaker and the monster's like, no, I'm leaving. Don't let yourself just waste gauge. Just roll out of it now. There's no reason not to. Whew. So I think that covers everything that I wanted to. I think I touched on it, but just to reiterate, while EI Slash will build gauge while we're level, when it's red, it will not. So keep in mind when your red's going to expire, you always want to spend it. And like I said, if you're going to do a Helmbreaker, it's pretty much always worth going to the EI Spirit Slash, just to really demonstrate the damage difference of doing that and why I think it's always worth it. Oh, another thing. Most of our round slash combos and our finishing combos, it's always going to sheath the longsword. If you're playing with focus mode on toggle, keep that in mind, because you're going to need to retoggle it every time the weapon is sheathed. But just to show the full damage difference here, I mean, given this has a wound, let me turn those off because the wounds are going to mess with our total damage. So that was a 571, and then it went up to 1379. So that is like 150% of what my Helmbreaker did coming out of that secondary attack, which is why, to reiterate, if I'm going to do a Helmbreaker, I'm dropping out the Spirit Release Slash. Either way, that covers everything I wanted to go over. Let's go over and take a look at some longswords. So, making our way into town and talking to the lovely Gemma, let's first go through a couple of the early game longswords, and one of the strongest ones early on that I would recommend. Let me get over to it. Where is it? It's down the list a little bit. Nope, up the list. It's going to be right here, the Dosha Fate Cleaver. Now, up until then, I actually really like using the bone. The bone coming in at 130 in yellow, I think that completely outclasses everything else. Green sharpness isn't going to be enough of an advantage over it. So my general rule of thumb is going to be stick bone until you get to Dosha, and then even then, that -5, that's nothing compared to 10 more roll. The Dosha Guma tree is actually a pretty solid longsword all the way up to even the end. At the very end, Dosha's coming in, where is it at? 240 -5 with blue, and we can get to white with a little bit of handicraft. But I actually ran EFR on a couple of the longswords, and the best EFR that's craftable coincidentally happens to also be my favorite, the Blaganga Burge. And I mean, it's a giant flamberge. Like, how could you not want to use it? But this thing is coming in at a whopping 230 true roll. It comes with a pretty healthy amount of white sharpness, and it has crit draw, which obviously ties in beautifully to a special sheath EI playstyle. Like, this thing was basically made for me. Which, on that note, crit draw is no longer just a single crit. The effect actually hits for like 3 seconds or so immediately after you draw, making it even better than it was before. But in terms of outright craftables, this baby right here, this is your best in slot. Very, very solid choice. Now, there are plenty of others that are also pretty respectable. The Righteous Lancelot here, coming in at 220, healthy amount of white on there, and then no affinity. Also a very solid choice, looks pretty badass. Unfortunately, this one, even though we have 20 more raw, taking the -10 and dropping down into blue kind of puts it behind a little bit. I suppose you could offset that given that it has a 3-3-1 as opposed to a 3-2-1, but Righteous Lancelot is a very solid choice. Another one that's very, very solid is actually the Gore Magala. Gormagala coming in at 210, 20% affinity, a very healthy amount of white sharpness on that. And then obviously 300 dragon, very respectable. Another one comparable to that is going to be the Rathian. The Rathian is nearly identical, but it's going to have 5% less affinity. But if you're looking for a good all-rounder greatsword, you can't go wrong with Wyvern Blade Holly. Now, in terms of the Ardian weapons, this is a category where I think a lot of the crafted greatswords are actually going to be superior to what we can get with Ardian. Because keep in mind, a full 3-attack Ardian is going to roll at 205 and 5 affinity. So you might want to do an Ardian Blast Greatsword, because there is no Blast Greatsword available, which is something that's pretty cool. But even then, I mean, you know, I guess a good comparison would be Rathian. I think Rathian is a pretty good baseline. You know, comparing Rathian to an Ardian, for example, Rathian is going to start with 10 more affinity and 5 more attack and better sharpness. Now, given the the Ardian is going to have access to 5 upgrades, you're going to have some pretty good rolls on an Ardian to make it compete with even Wyvern Blade Holly, which isn't even the craziest of the longswords. So if you're going to do Ardian, I would really do it for something like Blast, or maybe you're trying to do Element. It is going to sweep on Element, as it always has. You know, this gets up to 350. I think 350 is the highest for most of these. Yeah, so we're seeing 350 on a lot of those. And if we were to forge up a Ardian longsword, ooh, I'm running out of stuff. Let's go fire, fire, fire. That's going to be a base at 205, 5, 300. And then just comparing that to the various fire longswords. Once again, 205, 5, 300. That's going to have 350. Once again, no upgrades for the 205, 5, 300. And this one is going to be at only 200, so we wouldn't use that. So the real comparison here is going to be the Rathalos tree, where we're going to, you know, we already have better roll than it. After one upgrade, we could likely have better affinity, or we could even start at 200, 210. So we'd be comparing a 210 300 to a 210 350, and we have 3 level 3 deco slots, and on top of that, we have the 5 upgrades that are going to go into it. So as with most weapons, I think in terms of element, if you want to do elemental longswording, I think that Ardian is still going to be the clear winner there, just because being able to, you know, you could potentially roll a weapon that is almost identical to this. Like if you made a 210 and then you got sharpness, element, you would have a weapon that's like 210 affinity, comparable white sharpness, and like 420 fire with 3 level 3 decorations, which is just cracked. Going on into the armor, there is one armor set that I really like, but there's a couple things that I do want to talk about with armor. Now in low rank, one of the, not rarity, with low rank, one of the first things I want to talk about, which is a very specific thing to longsword, is quick sheath. Now, we can get some points of quick sheath on the Aloy Helm, we can get some over here, and then we can get some on the Balahara Mail. And if you're playing longsword, you know how valuable quick sheath can be. That's going to allow us to go into our EI stance just that much faster and being able to hit those punishing counters. So for early gear longsword, this is it, baby. Get these 3 pieces and then go with whatever gloves and waist you want, because this is the only way for you to get quick sheath this early outside of a talisman, which is only going to give you 1 level until you start getting the decos, obviously. Once we get into high rank, you should have plenty of decos for quick sheath, so it's not as much of a concern. Instead, one of the better skills for longsword is going to be something called Adrenaline Rush. Now, the way that Adrenaline Rush works is it's going to give you a 30 attack power for 30 seconds after executing a perfectly timed evade, and this does function with Foresight Slash. So if you are a big fan of Foresight Slash, you're consistently hitting Foresight Slash, maxing out Adrenaline Rush is very much going to be worth it. I was talking to Lord, he actually has a full build around this, which let me pull that up in Discord. I'll share what he set up as well. Let me find it. Which is different from my longsword build. I'm not as big a fan of that one. I'll give you all the basic breakdown. But so anyway, in terms of maximizing your Adrenaline Rush, there's a couple key pieces here. Rathalos Beta is going to give you 2 Adrenaline Rush and then 2-2. Going for the waist will give you 2 Adrenaline Rush and then a 2 socket. And then lastly, I believe it is, yes, the Zubu Beta is going to give you 2 Adrenaline Rush, a 2 slot, and a 1 slot. So those would be your 3 best pieces to work with. And if you're making an Adrenaline Rush build, what I would recommend is taking one of those pieces, it doesn't matter which, whether it's the helm, the chest, or the waist, going for Adrenaline Rush on your talisman to get 2 pieces, and then slotting in a single Adrenaline Rush decoration. And that means that you could pick up a different potential 4-piece set bonus and still have your Adrenaline Rush up at 5. Now for that particular build, what he ended up going with, I believe it was the chest, and then he was rocking, we went with the Gore Helm, we went with the Gore Greaves, and then we went Wex on that, and then Wex on that. And pulling that all together, I mean, obviously this doesn't have the decorations, the necklace, but basically it's going to give you a build that's like max Wex, max Adrenaline Rush, and then you'll have antivirus, you would get that up to level 3, and you would have the set piece bonus for Black Eclipse, so overcoming antivirus, that's going to give you another 25% affinity, so you're getting 25% affinity from that, you're getting 50% affinity from Wax, and then you're getting whatever your weapon has on. So it is a very, very potent build, especially with the additional damage that you have coming in, the 30. Instead, the particular build that I am a big fan of is, this is basically more designed for Blaganga, because since we're coming with an innate negative 10 affinity, it's going to be a lot harder for me to ramp up to that 10% affinity cap. And so instead, this sword already has crit draw 3 innately, so we are going to ramp that up, going crit jewels to get crit boost up to level 5. I'm going to slap a sharpen, because what else do you slap into a level 1 deco slot? And then instead, I'm going to drop in a single mighty to help offset the 10% negative affinity I have. We're still going to, why do I have 4 quick sheaths in? I should not have 4 quick sheaths. Let me go, actually I could slot in some divine blessing. Yeah. And I'm going to work around burst. Now, one of the main reasons I'm doing burst as opposed to adrenaline is because burst has some really nice benefits to elemental damage. And even though this isn't a primarily elemental damage build, we do still have some ice damage, and burst is going to ramp that up quite a bit. In terms of longsword, let me see the exact values. I am getting 140 extra ice and 18 extra raw by having burst up. And then we're also going to be picking up the 2-piece bonus with antivirus. We have quick sheath up to level 3. We obviously have Wex, and then crit boost and crit draw. And so it all comes out pretty well. This is a much more kind of a bruiser build as opposed to a graceful build, but especially because we're working with crit draw, I can lean a lot heavier into the EI special sheath attacks, which I'm a really big fan of those. Another thing that you could potentially do is, if you're not worried about maximizing out your crit, keep in mind that we really, really benefit from having access to wounds, because we can pop multiple wounds and just jump straight up into red. So another thing you could potentially do is just go for the good old Arkfeld. You could go for a combination of Guardian Arkfeld, get Flayer up to max, and then run one of those pieces that I previously talked about. And instead of doing a crit, just run a build that's more surrounding Flayer and Adrenaline Rush. And that would also be really solid, because you're definitely going to benefit from having access to Flayer up at level 5. But I've been doing a lot of Flayer 5s lately, and so I really wanted to mix things up a little bit with the longsword setup. So once again, just to go through the parts, one thing I do want to call out here is I could have protection up at level 3, but I mean, I could go protection even at level 2, I guess. But since I don't quite have enough level 1s, because I need to have Sane here, because that's going to get me to antivirus 3, and you got to have 3 quick sheaths. That much is obvious. So I could either go, well, for the fact, actually, real fast, since I'm not online right now at all, I might as well slot in the 2 protection, and then where's my 3rd protection at? There we go. So there we go. Look at that. I got Divine Blessing level 3 now. But what you just saw there, if you are going into online play in any capacity, you're going to want to have on that. So earlier at the video, I was talking about, longswords and trips. As long as you have Shock Absorber on, you take no reactions, no trips. Hammers can't launch you into the air, none of that stuff. You don't need to worry about flinch free anymore. It's no longer that. Shockproof. As long as you have a shockproof jewel and shock absorber, you're not going to be getting hit whatsoever in multiplayer. So I could go for this right now. I mean, that's probably fine. Let me just put that in anyway, because pretty soon I'm going to be running online with this exact build, so might as well just get used to it. But all in all, very, very comfy build, and especially with the Blaganga Burge coming in with crit draw 3, slotting in the crit jewel and getting that up to 40% just seems like a no-brainer, because it's just going to pump the damage of my EI slashes that much harder. Either way, though, that is enough talking about the build. Let's go on in and jump into a hunt. All right, for our hunt, we're actually going to be going after something that, to be truthful, I'm not as confident in my abilities to counterplay this thing, but we're going to try it out anyway. And that is Fulgur Anjanath. Really wanted to focus on trying to hunt something I hadn't before in each of these videos. I mean, obviously I've hunted all this stuff before, but, you know, I wanted each video to have a different monster. I actually considered doing Arkveld, because I know his moveset the most out of any of the monsters, but I decided I would save Arkveld for Lance, just because of how aggressive he is, and the fact that the Lance is a bastion of defense. I figured that would be a pretty fun matchup, but let's go see what I can do to good old Fulgur. Get me, Azure. Get me out of here. He's trying to snot me. Come over here, idiot. Yeah, come over. What's he doing? Oh, no, he's coming this way. Boom, boom, boom. What do y'all think? Is he more lightning-y than before? I think he is. You can also foresight slash through rolls and shit. Ah. Big whiffs. Big hits. Love it. Looking good. Looking good. Where'd the wound go? That should not have hit me.
Looks like it's moving to a new area.
You ain't moving anywhere, bro. I want to do more combos, but bro is just like wound city out here. It's just like, oh my god, my legs are exposed, my face is exposed, my legs are exposed, my face is exposed. I'm like, well shit, I mean, if you're just gonna give them up like that. Another thing out of our combo there, you saw I was able to, instead of going into a, you know, I finished in sheathing, straight into a special sheath. Damn, dude, he got fucking cooked. I think that may be our fastest hunt so far.
Well, for that one.
Yeah, that's it's not good for full range Nat, bro. It's not good for full range Nat. God damn. And like I said, I almost did main longsword in this game. I love the IG. But either way, I didn't get, I don't think I got a single counter in that entire hunt, but I mean, you can't argue with the results. A 333 is pretty fucking good. So, you know, no real counterplay in that showcase, which is unfortunate, but I mean, the build speaks for itself. We pumped the big damage. So either way, we're gonna wrap up. In terms of what's up next, I'll probably do bow, just so we don't have like all of the ranged weapons back to back to back. But either way, we're gonna close this one out here, and I'll catch y'all soon with another one.